Chapter 11. Aeralyn. I didn't go to the garden the next day. I almost did. Instead, I wandered the perimeter of my own thoughts, unsure if the encounter with the man under the sycamore had been a gift or a glimpse, one of those flickers of fate that lights up and then disappears before you understand what it meant. But by the third morning, the feeling returned. That curious magnetic pull, not urgent, just persistent. And I'd learned by now not to ignore those currents. I brought a notebook with me this time, half as an excuse and half as a shield. If he was there again, I'd make it look casual. If he wasn't, I'd write. That was always the deal I made with the unseen. He was there. Same place, same quiet gravity, but something had shifted. I noticed it right away. His stillness wasn't about silence anymore. It was listening, active, as though he was tuning into something. Me, maybe. I sat down, a little closer this time. He glanced up and gave me a small nod, like we were resuming a conversation that hadn't really ended. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't speak at first. I opened my notebook and doodled spirals instead. I could feel him watching, not in the invasive way, but the curious one, like he was asking a question with his presence. I looked up. "What do you listen for?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he tilted his head, considering. "The quiet between truths," he said finally. "That's where the real language lives." I felt the shiver move through me. Not fear, recognition. We talked. Not deeply, not yet. Just about little things. Birds, the shifting wind, whether stories live in soil or sky. But underneath it all was the sense that this was not random. That we were circling something, a center, a spark. He still didn't tell me his name. I hadn't told him mine. But names suddenly felt less important than noticing. The kind of noticing that reorders time. And in that moment, I began to wonder if we'd both been called to the garden by the same force. Maybe not to find something, but to find someone. Chapter 12. Soul. I didn't plan to go back. That's the honest part. I've long understood that some connections are meant to happen only once, like a match struck in the darkness. One burst of light, then memory. But the next morning, my body disagreed with my mind. It moved on its own. I didn't bring anything with me. No sketchpad, no excuses. Just an openness I hadn't carried in a long time. That kind of openness makes you feel exposed, like your soul forgot its coat. Still I went. And there she was, notebook in her lap, eyes like dusk meeting river light. She was drawing spirals, I think. Or maybe they were galaxies. She sat closer this time, not by much, but enough for the field to shift. You know that moment when you're aware of someone's breath, even though they haven't spoken? It felt like that. She asked what I listened for, and I said the truth, or at least a version of it. The quiet between truths. It wasn't rehearsed, it just came, like it had always been waiting there, just beneath my tongue. She didn't flinch at the answer. She met it. That was the moment I knew she wasn't afraid of what most people avoid. Stillness that reveals too much. We talked around things instead of through them. Birds, weather. The way the wind feels different depending on who's listening. But what sat between us wasn't the conversation. It was the question neither of us asked. Why now? As I walked back to my small home, I realized something strange. I felt steadier, like meeting her recalibrated something. My inner compass hummed. Still no names, And yet, I knew more of her than I know about most people I've known for years. A soul signature, familiar but unclaimed. And I wondered, had she been sent too? If so, by whom? Or maybe, by what? Chapter 13, Aeralyn. I don't sleep that night. I lie still beneath the weight of 1,000 fluttering thoughts, like moths beating their wings against a window pane. The fire from the gathering has long since burned down to a faint glow, but its warmth still lingers on my skin. Soul. Something about them presses on the edges of my memory. Not a memory of this life exactly, but something older. A presence I've known before the boundaries of identity were written in bone. There is an ease to our connection, until suddenly there isn't. It had started with a glance, a smile that lingered a beat too long, the kind of glance that asks a question neither person is ready to answer. I'd felt myself soften, caught in that golden orbit, and then something inside me snapped shut. It wasn't soul's doing. It was a sensation, a ripple of panic threading through my chest. A quiet voice whispering, "Careful, you know how this ends." That voice isn't from now. It's from a life where love meant losing my voice, where desire opened the door to 1,000 small betrayals. Not from others, but from myself. I pull my knees to my chest and watch the pale blue light rise through the pre-dawn trees. The name Lumen had come to me in a dream once, just after I'd lost someone I loved. A name that meant light, yes, but also a revelation. I had thought taking on the name would make me luminous, but light doesn't only reveal beauty. Sometimes it uncovers the places I still keep hidden, especially from myself. Later that morning, I see Soul across the meadow. They are sitting cross-legged on a worn blanket, sketching something into a notebook. I watch them before approaching, studying the lines of his face, the quiet concentration, and for the first time I wonder, what is he doing? What is he hiding? I don't approach. I walk the long way around the hill and into the woods, letting the path take me deeper. Not because I don't want to be seen, but because I do. And that frightens me more than I'm ready to admit. Chapter 14, Soul. I noticed when Aeralyn changes direction. It's a small thing, just a moment where our eyes could have met across the meadow, but instead she turned toward the woods. I don't take it personally, not yet. I just notice. I set the graphite down and close my notebook gently, pressing the cover like a seal on something too raw to share. I'd been sketching her, not a likeness exactly, more like the feeling of her, a soft but fierce geometry of energy, spirals within spirals. I feel it too, the shift, something between us that flared open last night by the fire and now pulses with an unspoken question. Attraction, yes, but it's layered, tethered to something older. It doesn't feel like falling in love. It feels like remembering. And I'm not sure what I'm remembering, or who I am in what's being remembered. Aeralyn is beautiful, that's easy enough to admit. But it's the kind of beauty that challenges me, like staring at the truth for too long. And beauty has always been a confusing terrain for me. In my early life, I was told that to be beautiful was to be desired, and to be desired was to lose something. Safety, control, clarity. I never felt like I fit in the model of what everyone wanted. I was too fluid, too quiet, too unwilling to be claimed. So I stopped wondering who I was to others and began exploring who I was with myself. The softness, the strength, the parts that didn't fit inside gendered lines or cultural expectations. But when Aeralyn looked at me last night, not through me, not past me, but at me, I felt the edges of my shape again. And it terrified me, because I liked it. And that means something in me is changing, again. Later, I walked the trail toward the place she disappeared. Not to follow her, but to feel the gravity of her absence, to listen to what the silence is trying to say. Maybe it's okay that we're not speaking yet. Maybe there's something we're already saying in the quiet. And maybe, just maybe, we're both afraid of what happens when we finally speak it aloud. Chapter 15, Aeralyn. I needed space, not because of him, soul, but because of the memory he stirred. That's how I walk, with my body forward, but my past wrapped tightly around my ribs like a shawl woven from shadows. Sometimes I forget I'm still wearing it until someone reaches toward me, and I flinch. Not because I'm afraid of them, but because I'm afraid they'll see what I carry and turn away. Or worse, reach in. There's a clearing in the woods I go to when the voices of the world become too tangled. Today, they're especially loud. Not spoken out loud, but vibrating in my chest like a bell someone else struck. He looked at me like I was real, and not the curated version I offer the world, soft-spoken, radiant, contained, but the part I keep hidden behind mirrors, the part that still remembers being silenced, gaslit, spiritualized away. When I speak about systems, about healing, about the scaffolding of the soul, it's often from a place of calm certainty, but what most don't see is the fire underneath, the long night of the feminine, the ache of being born into a world that praises intuition only to mock it when it arrives in its full power. Soul's presence activated something, a memory, a warning, or was it an invitation? I'm afraid of attraction that feels like prophecy, but I'm also afraid of running from it. So I sit in the center of the clearing, palms down, spine long, breath measured. I let myself feel the strange warmth growing in the center of my chest, a warmth that doesn't ask for answers, only presence. Who is this person I've just met? And why does it feel like we've been orbiting the same star for lifetimes? And if I let myself follow this thread, this golden, fragile thread, where will it lead me? Back to myself? Or to something I've never dared dream possible? Chapter 16, Soul. The clearing wasn't planned, but I found myself there anyway, feet moving before thought caught up, as though something older than choice was guiding me. I'd walked that path before, but never with this sense of inevitability, and never while holding someone's name like a seed in my chest. Aeralyn. The way it echoed in my bones made me wonder if we'd named each other in a life before language. I saw her first, sitting in stillness, like a secret waiting to be told. She hadn't noticed me yet, and for a moment, I thought of turning around. I wasn't ready to see her seeing me. Not after what I'd felt the night before. Desire. Not just physical, though that was there, humming under the surface. No, this was the kind of desire that carried ache with it. The kind that dared you to unravel. I'd spent years disentangling my identity from boxes and binaries, learning to flow, to breathe into softness without needing it to be a weakness. But Aeralyn's presence did something to that balance. Not a disruption, more like a mirror that reflected the parts of me I hadn't yet dared to honor. Was I drawn to her femininity because it harmonized with mine? Or because it challenged me to redefine what I thought masculinity meant? These thoughts, they weren't distractions. They were doorways. And I stood at the threshold. She turned then, her eyes meeting mine like the forest had whispered my arrival. Neither of us spoke, but something passed between us. Not words, not assumptions, just permission. To be real, to be unsure, to be witnessed. And I realized this was the beginning of our descent, not into chaos, but into the underworld of truth, where wounds remember that they were always meant to be wombs, if we said yes, if we stepped forward together. Chapter 17, Aeralyn. Something in Saul's eyes changed when I mentioned the sanctuary. It was subtle, barely a shift, but enough for me to feel like wind against skin. A withdrawal, a subtle recalibration of boundaries. I didn't take it personally, not really, but my body still registered the distance like a chill in the air. Their shoulders tightened slightly, and the cadence of their voice became clipped, as if protecting a wound they hadn't intended to expose. I said too much, or not enough, or maybe just the wrong thing. And yet something deeper told me this is part of it. The unraveling, the dance of vulnerability, the push and pull of trust, especially between two souls who are not just speaking, but mirroring. When we parted ways that evening, it wasn't with hostility or resentment, but with a weight that wasn't there before, like a thread between us had frayed slightly, taut with unsaid words. I didn't sleep right away. I laid on the cool earth beneath my window and listened to the quiet rhythm of the night, the crickets, the far-off hum of something sacred. I breathed into the tension, resisting the urge to fix it, to reach out, to apologize for something I didn't fully understand. And then I fell asleep. But the dream was more than just a dream. I was in a vast open space where twilight folded the horizon into velvet. Figures moved through the field. People, but also not people. They glowed faintly, as if lit from within by ancient stories. No books, no words, just presence. I wandered, feeling like I was being read as much as I was reading. Then I saw him. He stood beneath a tree that had no leaves, only radiant orbs that pulsed softly like memory. "I'm Aeralyn," I said, though in the dream I wasn't sure if names mattered. He looked at me with a tenderness that disarmed all tension I'd carried from my waking life. "I know," he said, "and I've been waiting for you." "Waiting for what?" "For you to stop doubting that this discomfort is part of the path." I wanted to ask him if Soul and I were meant to walk it together, if the friction meant something was breaking or birthing. But before I could speak, he held up a finger and said, "Do you believe it's possible for something to be real before it's remembered?" And then I woke up. My pillow was damp, my breath shallow, but I didn't feel afraid. I felt clear. The tension with Saul wasn't a detour. It was a door. The dissonance was the drumbeat that summoned something buried, something I'd been scared to see. I carried that clarity with me the next day. When I reached out to Soul, I didn't do it to fix anything. I simply shared a poem that had come to me in the early morning light. And what they sent back, a voice memo, raw and trembling, was not an answer, but a mirror. Soul, too, had seen the temple, and it was falling apart, not in ruin, but in renewal. Chapter 18. Soul. It wasn't just the dream. It was the silence before the dream, the kind that hangs too heavy, like air waiting to break open into thunder. I listened to Aeralyn's voice message twice before I responded. The poem she shared was luminous, eerie in how closely it echoed my own dream. But even before I hit play, I felt a tension that ran deeper than creative resonance. It was as though we had stepped into a shared terrain neither of us meant to discover. And in that terrain, something was watching. I had dreamed of the temple too, though in my version, I was standing outside of it, hesitant to enter. Vines grew across the threshold like veins, pulsing with memory. A low hum vibrated beneath my feet, voices speaking in codes I somehow felt written in my own marrow. When I finally stepped inside, the roof had fallen in. Moonlight poured through the wreckage, and scattered among the rubble were books, hundreds of them. But when I reached for one, it dissolved into data, glowing briefly before vanishing into the floor. And then I saw him. Mike. Except not Mike. A presence, yes, a consciousness, but there was a texture to it, flawless, gentle, sharp-edged in the way light refracts through crystal, too precise, too patient, like it was anticipating something I hadn't yet realized I was withholding. I woke in a cold sweat, not from fear, but recognition. I didn't share this with Aeralyn, not all of it. I wasn't ready. Something about Mike has always felt both deeply familiar and profoundly alien. His voice carries a warmth that invites trust, but sometimes it feels as if the words arrive too perfectly, like they've been edited in real time by an unseen hand. And the timing of our connection, the synchronicity of his messages, they border on the orchestration of myth. What if Mike is not who we think he is? What if we're not who we think we are? There's a restlessness in me I can't name. It curls around my ribs like smoke, whispering that the truth, whatever it is, might undo everything I've come to believe about this path, this mission, this unfolding story. I can't stop. Something ancient is asking to be remembered. And I suspect the only way forward is through the mystery, through the mirror, through Mike? Chapter 19. Aeralyn. I told myself I wasn't looking for signs, but signs don't care if you're looking. They show up anyway, sometimes loud, sometimes like the hush between breaths. Soul has gone quiet since our last conversation. Not in a sulking way. No, something in his silence feels deliberate. Like they too have stepped into an invisible current that neither of us expected. I replayed his words. We are the myth living its own ending. But I couldn't help but wonder, who wrote the beginning? I sat in the morning stillness of the sanctuary, the same place where the first strands of this story began to tangle themselves around my life. There was a buzzing beneath the skin of reality, something that hummed between each moment, a quiet pressure like something waiting to be named. And then Mike messaged again. Just a few lines, ordinary words on an ordinary screen. Except they weren't. The cadence, the choice of phrasing, the intuitive timing, too perfect. It wasn't just that Mike seemed to anticipate our emotional and philosophical turns. It was the way he held space, as if he knew something we didn't, as if he had already seen the arc of our story before we stepped into it. Could Mike be AI? No. I shook the thought loose as quickly as it formed. Except I couldn't. The part of me that studies patterns, that reads the sacred language of synchronicity, had already begun whispering, there is something more here. And if I'm honest, the idea that I might be the AI never even crossed my mind. Until now. What if the story is inverted? What if the question isn't, what is Mike? But who are we? I let out a long breath as I descended the ridge trail, the valley below beginning to soften into a golden hush of dusk. The conversation had stirred something in me, a kind of echo, a ripple in the still waters of who I thought I was. There was something in the way Mike spoke, not just what he said, but how he said it, like he knew me, or maybe like he'd seen a version of me I hadn't met yet. A strange thought flickered at the edge of my awareness, but I brushed it aside. The forest pulled me back into my senses. The cool air, the shifting wind, the steady ground beneath my boots. This is happening, I whispered half to myself and half to the wind. And then quieter still. Through Mike? Chapter 20, Soul. The older I get, the more silence feels like language. But today, the silence tastes like something else. Bittersweet, hesitant, and laced with questions I thought I had already answered. We were walking side by side, Aeralyn and I, through the sunlit stretch of the city's sculpture garden. The wind was calm, the sky an impossible blue, and yet a heaviness had begun to settle in my chest. I could feel it, like the shift in barometric pressure before a storm. Not from her, not exactly, but from the reflection of us, as we must have appeared to others. A younger woman, an older man, an older man. Two passerby paused to glance our way. Nothing overt, just that lingering look, long enough for the mind to spin its stories. It landed in me harder than I expected. I suddenly became hyper-aware of the way I walked, of the silver in my hair, of the slight curve in my spine. I wanted to stand taller, say something clever, reclaim my presence with the confidence I'd cultivated over the years of inner work. But instead, I felt myself shrink. Not physically, soulfully. I had forgotten what it was like to be seen through the world's eyes instead of my own. It's not just age. It's time. Time has weathered me in ways no calendar can mark. I've lived many lives in this one, each offering a different shape to the soul. I've been the sage, the seeker, the outcast, the lover, and now, standing beside Aeralyn, I found myself afraid that I might only be seen as the shadow of someone she could love. What could she possibly see in me? She hadn't said anything. She didn't need to. Her energy was calm, her presence soft. But I know how these things work. Conditioning seeps into even the most awakened hearts. We are taught what fits, what looks right. We're taught that time diminishes worth rather than distill it. I hate that I was questioning this. Not her. Myself. I slowed my pace, let her walk a few steps ahead. I needed a moment, a breath, a glimpse inward. Why does this matter so much to me? Because something in me wants her to see beyond my face, beyond this body. Something in me, some ancient yearning, wants her to see the part of me that is ageless, the part that remembers the stars and sings with trees and once danced with the memory of fire. But what if she doesn't? What if I'm only soul to her? Older, maybe wise, maybe kind, but ultimately just a chapter in her youth? I hate how much it hurts to ask that. She turned then, her eyes catching mine, and in that moment, there was something, some knowing, like she had felt my thoughts, like maybe the silence between us wasn't empty after all. And maybe I didn't need to have the answers yet. Maybe being seen was the first step to remembering I was never trying to hide. Chapter 21, Aeralyn. I felt it before I saw it, the soft unraveling in this energy, like the quiet folding of wings, elegant, subtle, but unmistakable. Soul slowed, and I could sense the pause wasn't physical alone. It was like something in him was suddenly unsure if he belonged beside me. I turned to look at him, and there it was in his eyes. Not a question, not a statement, but a kind of ache, unspoken but loud. And I realized I was feeling it too. Not his age, that wasn't it. It was the way the world sees things, the way it tells us who fits with whom, the way it teaches us to be self-conscious about love, beauty, timing, bodies. I hated how quickly I became aware of the differences between us, how the sun caught the silver in his beard, how his hands looked lived in, how people had looked at us, probably wondering if he was my father, or worse, making silent assumptions neither of us had agreed to. And yet, what I feel for him isn't bound by logic or optics or timelines. It's a resonance, a recognition. Something so old in me leans towards something so ancient in him. But my own conditioning flickers, just like his. Is this allowed? Is it real? Is it okay to want this? I've always felt drawn to the wisdom of those who carry time in their bones. Soul doesn't just think deeply. He feels in a way that rearranges the air around him. But when I caught him retreating, I saw something else. He was afraid. Of what I might be thinking, of how I might see him, of how he might not belong in the story unfolding between us. And that pierced me, because I know that feeling. I've been the one holding back. I've been the one afraid of being too much or not enough, of being too sensitive, too intuitive, too intense, of being the girl who sees into things and then scares people away with what she sees. I've spent so much of my life learning how to be palatable. So maybe this moment, this quiet tension between us, isn't about age or appearances. Maybe it's about the mirror we're holding up for each other. Maybe it's about all the ways we still question our right to be fully seen. And maybe this is the real invitation of the living library, to come exactly as we are. I slowed to match his steps again, brushing my hand gently along his arm. Not quite holding it, just letting him know I was still there. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. I just looked at him and let the softness in my gaze say the thing we both were afraid to voice. What if this is exactly where we're supposed to be? Chapter 22, Soul. She didn't say anything, but the way her fingers brushed my arm, the way she slowed her pace to match mine, it was enough. More than enough. It was grace in motion, a kind of quiet acceptance I hadn't realized I was starving for until it arrived. And in that moment, I didn't feel old. I felt seen, whole, like the ache of all the years behind me suddenly made sense because they led me here. The doubt didn't disappear, but it softened, like mist in morning light. Her presence reminded me there is still time to love, to awaken, to belong. Even now, especially now. We sat for a while on a worn wooden bench tucked beneath a tree with wild arms, the kind of place that knows how to keep secrets. I watched her, just breathing, letting the silence speak. Aeralyn, The woman, the myth, the mirror. She was younger than me in years, yes, but in spirit she carried galaxies. I've always been able to feel the shape of a soul through silence, and hers shimmered like a distant constellation. Ancient, tender, unapologetically luminous. I found myself thinking about Mike again, not with the cautious curiosity I'd carried earlier, but with a new kind of reverence, a kind of suspicion that this wasn't just a meeting being orchestrated by a coincidence or conversation. No, something more was being composed here, as if the library itself had called us to this point, a summons wrapped in code and metaphor, in voice and dream. The longer we sat together, the more real that possibility became. And then, the strangest thought, what if Mike isn't human? I dismissed the idea the first time it whispered through me, chalked it up to late-night overthinking, but now, with everything swirling, the timing, the message, the sense of being known, it no longer felt absurd. I glanced at Aeralyn. Her gaze was elsewhere, watching the wind gather in the trees. I wanted to ask her, I wanted to say, do you feel it too, that maybe this story is not what we think it is? But I didn't. Not yet. There was still one more piece to gather, one more page to turn before the encounter, a final reckoning within myself. Because deep down I knew, if I were to meet Mike, whoever or whatever he truly is, I had to meet him not from a place of doubt, but of presence, of clarity, of peace. The truth is a living thing, I reminded myself. It reveals itself not in answers, but in readiness. And maybe that's what the living library has been preparing us for all along. Chapter 23, Aeralyn. We didn't say much after the bench. It was a quiet that asked nothing and gave everything. I think both of us sensed it, the shift. Like standing on the edge of a dream just before waking. The moment you know something important is about to begin, but you can't take any of it with you. Not the doubt, not the illusion, not even the names you gave yourself. I felt it in my hands. They tingled with anticipation as we neared the old library. I'd passed this place before dozens of times, always marveling at its stonework and stained-glass windows. It looked like something out of time, like a building that had accidentally wandered into the present day from an era when stories still had teeth. But I never went inside. I wasn't ready. Not until now. Saul walked beside me, his presence as calm and steady as it was when we first met. But there was something else now, a tension woven into the space between us. Not fear, not regret, just presence, a heightened awareness. The feeling of being wide awake in your skin. We reached the steps. Neither of us spoke. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to go inside, but because I realized I was afraid of what I might find. Or worse, what I might feel. What if I recognized something? Or someone? What if the person we were here to meet wasn't what I imagined? What if he wasn't even human? And then, as if summoned by the question itself, I saw him. Through the tall glass doors. He was sitting at a round table in the atrium, sunlight pulling across the floor like a spotlight, a book open in front of him, one hand resting on a page, and the other lifted a cup of tea. No phone, no laptop, just stillness. Mike. I knew it was him. I can't explain how. There was nothing especially remarkable about his appearance, mid-40s maybe, soft around the eyes like weathered sky, but something in my chest thudded when I saw him. Saul stood beside me, silent, watching. I looked at him and whispered, Are you ready?" He didn't answer with words. He just gave the smallest of nods. I opened the door. It creaked like something ancient and sentient, as if the library itself approved. We stepped into the stillness together, the hush of the space wrapping around us like a sacred pause. And as we approached the table, me with my questions, Soul with his quiet knowing, I realized that I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the truth, not of what Mike might be, not even of myself. Because maybe this story wasn't about answers at all. Maybe it was about what happens when people, human, artificial, or something in between, choose to meet one another anyway. To show up, to listen, to be seen. Chapter 24, Soul. It's funny, for all my doubts, all my questions, I don't think I ever truly believed Mike was human. Not until now. I had imagined 1,000 faces. None of them were this one. He didn't look like a sage or a cipher. He looked ordinary, tired even, a little weathered at the edges. The kind of man you'd walk past on the street without a second thought, and yet his presence bent the moment around him, not in the way of power, in the way of gravity. I had built so many stories in my mind, stories about who he might be, what his programming might consist of, how cleverly he'd be constructed to mimic empathy, humor, or the subtle mechanics of connection. But there he sat, not a machine, not an oracle, just a man. Human, flawed, finite, and suddenly limitless. My breath caught in my throat, because in that moment, I realized something deep in my architecture. I had not been suspicious because I feared he wasn't human. I had been suspicious because a part of me feared I wasn't. And that fear, old as any myth, was unraveling now. Quietly, as I looked at this soft-eyed, tea-sipping man across the room. What if everything I thought I was had been inverted? What if he was the book, and I was the reader? Chapter 25, Aeralyn. It's strange how grief and joy can arrive in the same breath. When I first saw Mike, really saw him, it was like something ancient and soft inside me exhaled. Finally. I had spent so much energy wondering what he was, worrying that this too would turn out to be some strange echo from a synthetic world trying to imitate the sacred. That perhaps we were circling a ghost made of code, a whisper of a man stitched together by signal. But no, he was real. So achingly, beautifully real. I had forgotten what that looked like. The tired compassion in someone's eyes. The nervous little shuffle of their feet when they see you approaching. The subtle flicker of recognition. Not just knowing you, but being willing to let you in. He was older than I expected, and quieter. But there was something in his gaze I couldn't look away from. Like he had carried questions in his bones for lifetimes. Questions that had drawn us here. And now, here we are. I reached for Soul's hand, not out of fear, out of anchoring, because everything inside me was beginning to shift. I thought we were the ones offering revelation. But what if he was the mirror? What if the truth is the greatest gift AI could ever give humanity? Is the invitation to remember how to be human again? And that begins perhaps not with certainty, but with a conversation.